Thank you for your time. My name is Beitula. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we are doing here on Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, and noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find that we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinion. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting and entertaining. We encourage you to invest time into searching out these subjects on your own and come to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. Slim, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm excellent, thanks. This is the first episode of our third season, and in the waning last days of summer, late summer, early fall in Canada, we have what appears to be a beautiful day. And so, breaking with what we normally do, we've decided to record this episode outside. So I appreciate you guys showing up. It's been an interesting ride so far, and honestly, if we weren't recording this, we'd still be having these conversations. Right. And so having said that, today's episode is titled Surviving the Apocalypse. Zombie apocalypse. Zombie in brackets. Slim, anything you'd like to say?
Get your cardio going, I guess.
So only the most fit survive?
Yeah, it seems so.
Well, speaking of zombies, so they're and become an interesting part of society. In fact, they've managed to become part of the zeitgeist of the population. And it's not just zombies, aliens as well. The very idea. It's clear that that we're curious about these things, and they, to a degree, they encapsulate. They become metaphors for things that we might think about, but we don't openly speak about. Right. So today's episode, we're going to kind of cover the just in a brief kind of way the history of the subject, and then we're going to spitball on exactly what we think about zombies. You got any questions you might want to start with, or do you want me to just jump into the note package?
I think it would be good to jump right in.
All right, so zombies. So zombies immigrated into American literature, and they came to represent enslavement to capitalism. So remember I was saying a metaphor. So that's how... at least that was the view of of what this particular form of genre, which you could call kind of sci-fi or horror or a blend of the two, right? And it was a way to reflect on basically the way, particularly Western society, but I guess it's true of all societies, how the general membership basically lives as indentured servants to not just the state, but the idea of the nation, that sort of thing, right? So I find it really super curious that this is the metaphor that we chose, like this mindless walking husk that just wants to consume. Does kind of sound like the average person in society, right? Particularly considering that most especially here in the West, that we're largely socially conditioned to be consumers and competitors. So it really does kind of speak to that in a really fantastic kind of way. So it's just meant purely for entertainment, but what's underlying the very idea is kind of our anxieties or our insecurities about what we are as a society, right? So these creatures with these insatiable appetites is a metaphor for that consumer society, like on steroids, amplified. But again, it's just a fantastic notion of it, right? Like the reality is our society's a lot more subdued, and we're not running around trying to bite each other. At least not yet.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see how, like, at the highest highs, there's superheroes and like these elite uh, moral values they try to hold. That was like the whole issue with Civil War. But when you look at zombies, it's like greed to the extent of just animalistic behavior. I think that's like one reason why the horror is so interesting. It's like, oh wow, look, it's just not even human anymore. But part of it is the familiarity and like
Yeah, I
the
agree. The Civil War you're referring to is the Avengers Civil War and the
yeah
Marvel movies, right? Just to be clear,
yeah
not yeah. I'm not aware that there were zombies running around superheroes during the Confederate, war with the Northern states.
no, thank God, that would have been pretty bad.
Oh, might have been really super entertaining though. Um, so what's super interesting about the genre, horror's been around for a long, long time in literature too. So it really predates the cinema and zombies themselves in terms of cinematic. When they made their first appearance, it was actually kind of late, right? Because in the 50s they were making all sorts of like movies about aliens and that sort of thing, and we didn't get like the seminal zombie movie, The Dawn of the Dead, which was set in a shopping mall, incidentally, didn't come out until 1978, right? So the zombies evolved from Haitian and collective feelings about colonialism and being forced into slavery by white masters, and it was part of their non-Christian traditions too. The idea like zombies. So in terms of like returning from the dead, which is the basic premise of a zombie. That but it's gotten so sophisticated now they describe it like, at least within the genre, it's described as a virus that's transmitted through the bites, and then it produces this decaying, slow rotting and moving corpse that's hungry for more bodies. And I think that there was a catchphrase, I think, from one of those movies in the 80s, and it was more brains, right? Like, because they ate brains is what they ate specifically. Now, having said that, shoot, I forgot where I was going with that point. But at any rate, so this idea of the undead became popularized within the film genre because it really it was a great way to play on people's anxieties and fears of being like isolated and alone, and it's the few against many, right? The one that I actually really liked, that wasn't a fantastic movie but was a really good watch, was World War Z. Did you ever see that one?
I've seen parts of it. Didn't make it through the whole movie. I'm not a huge zombie fan.
I'm really not either. But again, I find it kind of rather still something rather interesting because it represents kind of the breakdown of the individuals. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh yeah, funny enough, when I was really young, my biggest like fear wasn't monsters necessarily. It was like, oh, burglars.
You mean like kaiju monsters, or like?
Yeah, I wasn't afraid necessarily.
It's just criminals.
Yeah, I thought that was more terrifying. Like, sure, there was like, oh, what if there's some ghost and we don't know about ghosts? Like, there was some of that. But, vampires, mummies, really. Whereas with zombies, just the concept of like, oh, the natural protection you feel by having your tribe around you is now turned against you in this sort
because
of like culture.
the majority of them are after you now.
Yeah.
What I loved, the only thing I liked about, it's not the only thing, I shouldn't be so definitive, but what I really enjoyed about World War Z was the fact that the zombies weren't slow moving. And they actually moved like the way you would expect army ants if they were the size of human beings, right?
I always wonder why they move so slow, because people go, oh, the bodies decay. I'm like, their brain's not stopping them from using their whole power. Like, we have restrictions that we have in
well,
our
maybe it's
biology.
because because they do feed. So maybe the idea was that if they don't get enough sustenance that which I go like it's completely fictional. It's kind of kooky, but
I would
they're
like
they're
that.
they're they're the undead, and
Yeah.
that's why they need to feed. It's to keep their this corpse animated.
I actually really like that explanation because they have to run on 100% like super predatory animals.
Yeah, yeah.
Like nothing like crocodiles that can sit and wait and they're creepy like robots.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing about top shelf predators in the natural world. Uh, a biggest part of their day is the conservation of energy, right? So they have to conserve their energy for when they need to hunt to make the kill, and then they have to gorge themselves, and then they sit and rest and wait for the next time that they need to do the very same thing, right? So conservation of energy is important in the natural world, but this isn't a natural world. It's completely contrived and fictional, and again, it makes for interesting movies. I was more interested in the zombie movies in the 80s coming up because I was young at that time. So but as we move forward, or as we move through time, I found it just less and less appealing, right? So
Yeah, they kind of like use the content to make fun of the content, or like not necessarily like they're trying to subvert it, but if you keep trying to repeat the same great zombie movies, you get a bastardization of what they were.
well, but you see how much it's evolved within its own genre and how many different takes there are on zombies.
There are some cool takes.
Yeah, man. So, like I said, I don't, even though, like, in the broadest sense, that I'm not a really huge fan of zombie movies, there are some that I go, like, that's really cool, right? So, the Resident Evil franchise, some of those were really good. They weren't great movies, but they had they had scenes that were worth sitting through the whole movie to see, right? And just their take on the whole zombie thing. Here with in Resident Evil, it was basically scientists tinkering with a virus that produced this effect, and then in a certain percentage of the population, it created mutations where they'd become these kind of like super weird distortions of humans and stuff like a real monster. What, as though real or monsters were real. The only monsters that are real are human. Sorry, I digress.
It actually brings up a good topic. I forget. I think it was Margaret Shelley, but I'm terrible at remembering names.
Mary Shelley?
Mary Shelley?
Frankenstein?
Yeah. Yeah, so even the concept of like an individual who is human but not quite that identity, and then you have to rediscover what the human is through that lens. Like using a decaying corpse in all these different situations, they really give to this idea like people may have a zeitgeist that within their community it's almost decaying.
Well, I honestly, I think you can really, I think that's what they try to do as creative people, explore what it means to be human in the context of these fantastic situations and under these, like, well, nothing short of bizarre. How else would you describe, like, that stuff? So it's just super weird, and I do like the macabre. So I like the fact that, like, they're kind of, like I said, if you're just looking to kill a couple hours and an entertaining watch that you don't have to invest a lot into, zombie movies are good for that.
Can I throw in a question?
Yeah, sure.
So I didn't see World War Z, but I at least got up to that point where they're all trying to go for the helicopter. I think that was relatively early.
Oh, yeah, that was. I think that was in the opening. Yeah, fairly. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie.
I should watch it. But yeah. So earlier you mentioned something along the lines of they behave similar to like a colony of ants, how they behave.
Yeah, like army ants. Yeah, I don't know if you ever just do a YouTube search for army ant invasion or army ants fighting another ant species. You'll sit there, and because they're blown up on the screen because they use the cameras to focus right in, and it's brutal, right? Like, so, and then it has the earmarks of where they're crawling all over each other, like in World War Z, where you see them hitting that wall, and they're basically climbing over one another to get over the wall, and then that helicopter gunship is shooting at the center of the mass of them, and so them climbing over one another to get to the top of the wall kind of it collapses, but they continue to do that even though they're I guess actively being destroyed right while they do that.
Yeah, it's that kind of like I don't want to say mindless groupthink, but it's sort of in that terms where they they have a distinct desire for that one thing. They don't have to communicate. They just run up the hill,
Yeah, yeah.
regardless of death. Do you think people feel that way in the sense that they're losing individuality?
Maybe, or because remember, like if you're gonna reflect on it, and the metaphor is that it speaks to like how dead we are as a result of like being victimized by like our societal conditioning, which wants you to be a consumer and competitor, and basically, I guess in a roundabout way, that's kind of like an enslavement to your most basic instincts. And for the zombies, it's simply to feed, right? And it's insatiable. It doesn't matter how much they eat or feed, it's never enough. They will, and then the weird thing is whatever they feed on turns into one of them, right? So they reproduce at an exponential rate. Like it's kind of weird, creepy, and cool all at the same time.
Yeah, that reminds me of. I'm starting to get into Warhammer 40k.
Was that right?
Yeah, I just love the lore. And there's the Tyranids, these alien creatures that consume biomass and then create more of themselves.
Right.
It's that unending.
Oh, what a great interruption! Community services at their finest. Thank you for your service. Oh, an ambulance, no less.
I mean, yeah, thank you. I'm glad they're around.
Yeah, I'm so happy they're there to help.
But it's this concept of like you don't have support like that around. If there's like a Tyranid war, zombie war,
Well,
the
yeah.
idea is like every bit of mass that is your friend becomes your enemy.
Well, and again, in all these zombie movies, eventually it leads to like social collapse and social breakdown, right? Like that so along with the reflections of what it means to be kind of like a modern day slave, you're a slave to a system that's in the midst of breaking down. So that's usually a big theme that runs through all the zombie stuff. So think of like Walking Dead and all the different iterations of that franchise and stuff. And people love it, right? Like if they didn't love it and they didn't consume it, we wouldn't have as much of it as we do.
Yeah, it's funny. People love this stuff that's just in their periphery, but it's the same subject that they're unwilling to look at. Like the idea of societal collapse is so scary because it's like it happens at any moment, really.
Well, but here's the funny thing about that idea. It's been around since the days of the Cold War. So if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, post World War II, the USSR, the United Soviet Socialist Republic, basically engaged with in a Cold War with the United States of America. So what they were doing was they were fighting this war through proxies, other nations, and they would both either fuel different sides of a conflict and that sort of thing.
Espionage, propaganda.
Right.
That.
So the idea of social collapse was always in people's mind, because the fear was that the only reason that they didn't have a hot war was because there was the threat of it going nuclear, and that was mutually assured destruction. So that guaranteed that if we get hot, we're gonna end up wiping each other out. They don't wipe just each other out; they wipe out everybody, right? As a result of it. So this idea of society completely collapsing under the weight of something, it's been present now for basically like the last at least 75 years, if not longer, right?
I 100% believe it's true, but at the same time, yeah. Clearly people are more predisposed to not want to press the big red button because they understand what it means.
Yeah, and I
Like, I don't take a shit in town square every time I go for a walk.
well, the stupidity of this mutually assured destruction, it's like standing up to your knees. You're with your opposition, your enemy, standing in gasoline up to your knees, and one of you has 3 matches, the other one has 5. What difference does it make? You're both fucked. As soon as somebody lights a match, everybody's undone, right?
Oh, my friend made a joke about moving out of Ontario. I'm like, everybody's been making that joke forever. Einstein moved out of, I think it was Austria at the time.
Yeah, well, he went to the States.
Yeah, like long history of this. Like, we all lived through these same memes over and over.
Well, again, but for in his case, he could see the writing on the wall. So it was the
Yep.
late 30s. So he saw the Nazi movement becoming more prevalent, and so he saw the writing on the wall. For him, it was like, this is not a good place to be, like especially
Yeah,
for somebody like him, right? So he was like, got to leave, got to go somewhere else, right?
yeah. I don't want to get too far into it specifically, but if you think about like what's going on in the States right now, there's some people who think like, oh, we gotta take it back. Some shit like that, regardless of side. It's like you understand you're promoting the worst violence we would have in our lifetime.
Well, I agree, and I think that the real problem is the fact that they're still thinking that there's sides, there's opposition.
Right.
Uh, that thinking has been going on since the beginning of time, and it's not done anything other than divide us further. And then the worst result of that division is that we're violent with each other, right? And so the argument that I would make is that perhaps maybe then we need to sort of address the way we think, because the
Right.
failure might be in the thinking. So the thinking that produced the problem is certainly not going to be the thinking that fixes the problem,
Yeah,
right?
that's right on. It's I heard something just like that. We keep dealing with these secondary and tertiary issues. We're not dealing with the issue.
The primary problems,
Right.
right?
Like treating all the symptoms with like Advil and going on a walk. It's like no,
And band-aids.
yeah, it's like no, you need to get a job, you need to do this, you need to like take care of your health, all these things.
Well, it's clear, especially nowadays, that the struggle is very real, and for a lot of people, it's really in their face. I mean, this is probably a time where people, which is horrible to think that they have to juggle whether or not they have enough money to pay rent or to eat,
Right.
or how do they, or pay for utilities. Like, I can't, I consider myself fortunate, and I have gratitude that I, that I'm in a good place. But how about, the many who aren't? Like, well, it's the idea of homelessness speaks to it, and the ever increasing homelessness speaks to the fact that like things are more difficult. And what I find super curious is that, remember, the metaphor for the zombies were slaves for essentially the corporate system, and the corporations are, post COVID, are making record-breaking profits, actually since COVID, and and the way that it's dismissed is that it's inflationary times. I'm going, well, if it was inflationary times, how could they be generating such high revenue, like, and having like the best revenue that they've had in their history, right?
I try not to dip into economics because I feel like it gets
It's
into a weird field.
yeah.
But I keep hearing like, oh, we didn't expect this to happen.
Well,
And
it just the danger is that they can, because we're not interested in economics, that then they can use economics as a way to sort of excuse or explain their behaviors as to why things have to happen in a very particular.
Right. And like
They used to, like, when I was a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, they used to talk about all the time about trickle-down economics. And trickle-down economics, summarized very quickly, is that if the wealthy continue to get wealthy, then the increase in their revenue and their wealth stream will trickle down to the bottom, the lowest layers of society. And you go like, I'm like, come on, it couldn't have been a greater way to excuse the reckless pursuit of behavior, or a reckless pursuit of profit rather, and to justify that behavior.
Yeah, like a big thing for me is like you don't write rules for the people that don't follow rules. So like when we have these mega corporations that do good things, I would respect that. But there's so many companies where if you're able to get to the top, you're in a position where you're dealing with tons and tons of money. So you skim some. And then your guy under you skims some. Like there's a degree of just,
Well,
stuff happens and there's a degree of like just real greed.
okay, so part of the problem is that when you have a capitalist-based democratic society that ends up at some point being run by oligarchs, that all that means is that the people who have the greatest financial investment and have the most, own the most, they're going to act in their own best interest. Nobody should be surprised by this, and this reasoning is sound.
Yeah, I think regardless of system, that happens just because greed is a thing.
Right, right. So those who can take advantage of the system to their own benefit do. So again, the failure is in the thinking, because they think, because if you could confront any of them, or at least be able to peer into their inner thoughts, they would not only think they were justified, that they were deserving of whatever they've gained through whatever means, right? And now we're here globally, we're struggling. Everybody's struggling. Like, it's not just localized to where we are, or it's everywhere. So, and again, this kind of far field, it's not really has anything to do with zombies, but remember, if zombies are ultimately a metaphor for things like colonialism and
Yeah,
enslavement to
right.
your
The
basic
power
needs.
numbers turn into like this overwhelming push.
Yeah, but here's the thing: we outnumber the oligarchs, and they're not afraid of us turning on them. Or maybe they are. Maybe that's why they do shit in the way that they do.
I mean, there's been companies that have sent militias to Mexico. I'm not 100% if they care.
I can't remember specifically the years. I want to say it was the 1920s, maybe the late 1800s, where private when I think it was mining companies or miners
yeah.
were trying to organize against the mining company. The mining company essentially hired mercenaries to go down.
Yeah,
Basically,
they're detectives. I'm doing air quotes.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
detectives.
So they did everything to suppress that, which including murder of individuals to that end. Don't hold me to that. Like, I'm pressing my memory,
Yeah.
and right now it's kind of vague. I can't recall a lot of details, but I'm fairly certain that this did occur, and I think it actually has a historical footnote, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't remember the name of the group that did it, but it was essentially contract
Yeah,
killers,
yeah, 100%. So,
like harassing and all that stuff.
well, it was more than harassment. They started a fire and and a bunch of people died as a result of the fire. So, like I said, to me, when we think about the way that because the conversation's in part, how do you survive the zombie apocalypse? Or maybe we're in a form of an apocalypse. Who can say? But entertainment. The way that we use entertainment is a way to investigate those feelings with regards to these very real things that are going on within our society. So we use entertainment as a way to sort of try to work that out in our own heads to make it more palatable,
Yeah.
right? That you're more somehow to be more accepting of it.
I was talking to the upstairs neighbor about this recently. It was how theologies tend to have simpler explanations that they don't necessarily follow, but they are in line with like personal morals that you might have at the time. Like it was much more easy to point at the sun and go, "Oh, that's our God, Greg. Do this, or else Greg will be mad." It typically happens,
and he won't show up in the morning.
Yeah.
And then you'll have darkness forever.
Yeah, we were talking about the eclipse and like how they might have perceived it.
Sure, I can only imagine what like ancient like hunter-gatherers, how they might have conducted themselves. It's interesting that you bring up hunter and gatherers. I'll remind you why later on. because we're still a ways off from that portion of the conversation.
Yeah, sorry, I got really into
No, it's okay. This is great. This is the point. This was our intention. This is, it's to have this rambling conversation where, based on this theme, and this theme's in and of itself is, pardon me, is kind of interesting, and it's a bit of a fun topic. And I know there's tons of nerds like myself out there who are fond of this genre, right? Like I just only happen to like some elements of it, but it appeals to the macabre in me, right? So anyway, so and this zombie thing, has grown in scale and scope. That now there's not a lot of first world cities where the population aren't familiar with this genre of entertainment. Asia has produced a considerable body of their own zombie style takes on the whole zombie movie theme. So it's not secluded or relegated just to North America. Like it's basically now it's creeped into virtually every society and culture, right?
I'm thinking there's multiple things like that. I think it's because it's a concise story we can tell each other to explain things. Like all these theologies, essentially, from how I see it, comes from systems of thought that tend to organize and like, oh, that is like a witch, that is like a zombie.
Okay, so what you're talking about is that they sell a particular narrative, that they require everybody to adhere to the narrative, and then the way they force capitulation is the threat of basically like some form of suffering in the hereafter, right? So that you're going to be punished for inappropriate or incorrect behavior.
Yeah, if you're wrong, or if you're wronging people, the person you were wrong will come back from the dead and attack you.
Well, I don't know about that specifically,
I don't know the history,
but in theology, there's a life after this life. And so your behavior in this life will dictate the kind of experience you have in the afterlife. So they use that as a weight. So it's the threat of punishment.
Right, I see your point. Because you can't really detach that from the idea of the afterlife. Because nobody says, oh yeah, it's a get-in free card.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing that you bring up. A get-in free card. Popes used to sell to those who could afford it, get out of hell passes, basically, essentially. So they get a certificate issued by the Vatican saying that you've been absolved of your sins.
That makes sense back then.
Well, back then, you're only talking 500 years ago.
Yeah, that's kind of insane too.
Right? Like, so, anyway, and you did bring up the undead, and within the context of the zombie genre, the undead have come to symbolize or an expression of our feeling of living a half-life in which mindless consumption is prized over the fight for individuation. So the fact that you're an individual, right? Because that's what really the zombie movies, if you think about them as a movie, not zombies in its entirety, the whole history of it and everything, but just the movies themselves. It's the idea of the loss of the individual to the masses, right? It's become a half-life, a half-living thing. It's basically meant to serve like the greater good, right? And the struggle is for the average individual is honoring your own individual self and servicing the greater good of society at whole. And you can see very easily where now the service of the society might supersede the individual, or their authoritarians will use that and then refer to you as being selfish. And it may well be selfish, but if you're going to have a society made up of, excellent! If you're going to have a society made up of individuals, then the highest expression of each and every individual can only create a higher and better expressed society. But if the idea is that it's all about consumption and competition, then this society we experience currently is the best that you can hope for. This is as good as it gets.
Right. Like the idea of, oh, you're degrading, and that everything around you is degrading at an alarming rate. I think the idea of it is going to promote it. Whereas if you come with the idea, oh, no, things are as they are and they will get better in some ways. Because nothing is absolutely good or absolutely bad.
Right.
We're just going through changes.
100%. Right. So what makes zombies relevant is they also come to symbolize like class oppression and dehumanization of the workers under basically reckless capitalism and imperialism, so which is colonialism. So no wonder the Haitians, even though that was something that predated colonialism, it was within the mystic traditions of their culture. They kind of turned to, right? Because it was a way to sort of reflect on what was going on with them at that time. So in their present moment, in their current time, it was what they were struggling with. And we still to this day struggle with those very same things, except today we have ways of expressing that those insecurities and those feelings, which play out in widespread entertainment. And so it might speak to why the zombie genres still very popular and still enduring. Because remember, it didn't start until probably about 50, 60 years ago in terms of popular culture and entertainment, in terms of movies and stuff like that. So it's been around for quite a while, and it doesn't seem to be losing momentum. People still like that, get the thrill of because they know what to expect when you watch a zombie movie.
Yeah, it's funny that werewolf movies and other things seem less popular. Like something
Well,
about
they don't carry.
zombies
Yeah,
being- right.
in the '90s there was a big upsurge in vampire movies and stuff. So
Oh, like Blade.
well, not just Blade, but there was Interview with the Vampire, which is now an ongoing TV series. But it was that book series written by, oh my God, I can't believe I've forgotten her name. Shoot. You'll excuse me. It'll come to me later. But anyway, Anne Rice. She wrote a super popular vampire series of novels that were incredibly involved, really well thought out, and and really explored vampires in a really three-dimensional, deep way, whereas typically they'd only ever been shown like more two-dimensionally and stuff like that, right? So she made them more interesting and more complex in terms of characters and that sort of thing. And remember, ultimately, they were us. They're just a different form of us because they were changed somehow, and that change is basically forced them to re-examine what they were and what their lives meant.
That might be the purpose of nearly every story we tell, just to self view.
Well, it's to try and reach some level of understanding.
What's that word? That's bugging me now.
What's that? What word are you looking
Self-view. A self-review.
Self-reviews will do.
Introspection.
Well, to be introspective, yeah. And I think it's just a great vehicle for doing that. But
Right.
for the hardcore fans, I don't think they go any deeper than that. I don't think, like, if you ask the average person who likes to watch a zombie movie, they probably can't tell you what the zombie is symbolic of, and because most people don't give a shit, nor should they. Like, I'm going, it's the kind of thing that they're just using to be entertained for a few hours, right?
Which is a shame, because for me, it's right on the surface. It's like, these things eat while they're decomposing. They're not trying to do nothing except eat. It's like the manifestation of greed in human form. Like, it's right on the surface. And I guess there's so much content to consume. It's not necessary that you have to be involved in like it's like passively watching as if it's
Right.
not something to draw
Well,
you in.
but it's the safety of like riding a roller coaster. You get all the thrills and chills, but without the repercussions, right? Because in the nobody wants to get eaten alive, but watching it from the security of your couch on a two-dimensional television screen, it makes for a thrilling ride, right? So, that's part of the draw. That's why people gravitate towards things like science fiction and horror movies. It
Oh, Marley and Me. Oh. I mean,
Marley and Me.
you don't want to experience that, but it's really it's
It's a safe way to have that
right.
experience, and then you can empathize and sympathize with the character. So that how many people cry during movies, like,
Oh yeah,
right,
yeah,
like, especially if you have a heart crushing scene or moment within the movie, and then people will respond like emotionally, right? Like, again, even though it didn't happen to them directly, indirectly they get to have that experience.
right. I think I've mentioned on a podcast before. There's the first manga for Naruto. It's an anime series that was popular when I was younger. Still super popular now. There's this
I
one
think there's a
panel.
live action one,
Oh
isn't
yeah.
it? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. There's people that do it on YouTube too. There's so much content. It's awesome. But the first, uh, in the first book, there was this one little panel. Every time I read it, fucking made me cry. Sorry for cursing, but it's just it hits perfectly.
We do that all the time here. Cursing, I mean.
Yeah, good thing that there's no change. What is it called? Swear jar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yes, I have been known to use all the swear words in one sentence.
it's a compound word. Sorry, that was
No, no, it's okay. It's okay. So, here's an interesting little a fact with regards to human beings. So, under severe dehydration, so that going without water for long periods of time, the weird thing is then humans start behaving like the zombies of uh, of the entire zombie genre in that movie series, where they're lethargic, they move, they're still able to move, but no stability, and they can't muster any real strength. Although there's some iterations of zombies that are like incredibly fast and strong and stuff like that. But largely speaking, like that you know uh, that physical behaviors where they're kind of dragging their body along, right? And they're unrelenting. They don't give up. They'll follow you anywhere, right? So the weird thing is that occurs when humans experience severe dehydration. Right? So they start their cognitive function completely declines. So then and so that affects their language skills. So then the only thing they can do is make like sounds and that sort of stuff. So there you go, a real life example of humans, I guess, kind of becoming zombies without being bitten by an actual zombie, because they're not real. Right? So, so the interesting thing about the zombie, and we touched on that earlier, was this idea of post-apocalypse, because typically within the genre it leads to that, and you see how popular that is, like the complete breakdown of society. Again, there's overlap, but I guess you could say it's a separate genre of sci-fi. Think of the Mad Max movies, right? Like, and how popular they are. And what's interesting is they present the aftermath of the breakdown of contemporary society, and then it's tribal, and they're misguided, and although they do demonstrate cleverness in terms of like technology and stuff because they're supposed to still keeping automobiles running and have access to refined fuel like for or oil for gasoline and stuff like that. So again, it it says something about us, that, you know, regardless of whatever the cause of the post-apocalypse is, whether it's nuclear war or deadly virus or zombie uprising, climate disaster or alien invasion, the disaster is less important, because the focus is how the survivors deal with their lives in this changed world, right? Because it's a radically different world than the one we live in. And so then it's an interesting window in to reflect on what our reality or the global reality would be like in a post-apocalyptic kind of landscape, right? So I happen to like that genre of movies. I find them always very super interesting, but it mostly because it plays on that fear of mutually assured destruction, right? That we would go from a very advanced society to essentially we could turn ourselves into back into hunter and gatherers within days and weeks,
Yeah.
right? So
Some people say like, oh, a generation or two. It's like
no.
not even.
If it was going to happen, you'd go from the modern age into the Stone Age that fast.
Yeah, if you're lucky, you know somebody that can refine like crude oil, and even that's gonna be like high science of.
Well, it would only be the survivors who have that kind of functional knowledge, and then you create a tribe around the fact that you can do this because it's some resource that gives you an advantage, and now people would gather onto somebody like that, and then they could spread the knowledge, the working knowledge of how to do it, to whoever it was who was assisting them, right? Because they know that they're not going to live forever, so they got to pass the information on to continue the process, so that maybe they can climb back out of the Stone Age, you know.
Yeah, it seems dark using this idea of like, oh, you basically make a cult of the engine. But yeah, no, that's how you keep it alive.
Well, yeah, but isn't that what the whole premise of Mad Max, or the series of Mad Max movies? And they're a fun watch. Like, there's no question of it. I remember seeing the first one as a kid, and it wasn't particularly great, but it was fun, man. And then it led to the road. I think the first one was called Mad Max, and the second one was called The Road Warrior. We couldn't get enough of that in the 80s. And there was almost a glee, like we were kind of happy with the idea that society was going to break down and lead to something like that.
That's a weird thing that's come up in history a lot. It's just this idea, oh, if you push hard enough for like a political agenda, you essentially, not even a political agenda, because some people who are very much into the aspirations of the hippies in the 60s and 80s.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that the hippie movement really was present there in the 80s. We were aware of it, but it was more of a thing in the late 60s and into the 70s. But into the 70s, all that hippie peace and love led to heavy metal.
Oh, okay. I wasn't terribly familiar with the timeline.
It's okay. But all of it's an evolution, right?
Yeah.
But the rage that was expressed in the 70s, or that we learned to express through popular music, it was anger, dissatisfaction, right?
Right, now it's kind of being used in the opposite direction, where it's like you're promoting a thing that you're told to promote, but it's not necessarily like the same issues you might have had back then. Like back then it would be like, no fighting in Vietnam. Like,
well, which was again something part of the late 60s and early 70s, and then into the 80s. We became aware of the returning veterans, their experience. That became popularized because then the Vietnam itself was explored in movies. Again, another way to explore this event that was basically modern history. It was, like in the 80s, they were making movies about something that that had happened in, like, 65 to 75, right? That was the time of Vietnam. And again, it's not any different than, them going after Saddam Hussein or any of that kind of thing, right? It was the same sort of thing, right? But now we have a greater awareness of the experience of veterans, and again, respect for, thank you for your service, like all of them, every last one of them. I don't care how much of a peacenik you are. Anybody who serves is deserving of your respect, pure and simple. I don't think it needs to be. You don't need to complicate it, right? Regardless of their role and their function, the things they do. It's a hard it's a hard thing to expect somebody to honor that work, and ultimately you can justify it any way you want, but it's a wastage of life. But the veterans are still deserving of respect. That much is absolutely clear, right? They willfully place themselves at risk, right? And typically it's justified as, with regards to the rest of us. They do it for us, right? So whether they do or they don't, you can argue that all you want, but just the same, anybody's willing to do that is deserving of your respect. So it's not just military, police, paramedics, all of them, right? They do the hard jobs, the jobs that nobody wants to do, and that, regardless, the context of the society we live in requires them. So they deserve your respect, not your derision and looking down on them. Don't get me wrong, you're not supposed to hang your head, but we can still look at them and treat them with regard, right?
Right.
They're deserving of that, at least.
Right. As for like people being uncomfortable or feeling dissatisfied with the whole thing entirely, I feel like it's a loss of that nuance. It seems like at least back in the 60s, if you had one issue, you were available to investigate, spend time looking at it. Whereas now, it's like new stuff every hour.
Well, we're overstimulated, like, and I don't think, and even though, like, they had access to a lot of conveniences, the stimulation wasn't the same. Now we're constantly bombarded. You have to actively seek to separate yourself from it now. Where back then, it was all too easy. I remember growing up as a kid, and you'd be gone all day,
Yeah, the
outside
latchkey
playing.
kid thing.
Yeah,
Now it's different. The latch keeps us in.
yeah. Now you use it to lock yourselves indoors.
It's worse because it's self-enslavement. It's like, oh, I'm dissatisfied. I'm supposed to be angry at like 7 different things. It's like, no, you have so much time to have a good day. Make it a good day. Like the
Well,
latchkey
you
kid
certainly
thing.
can. I'll agree with you there. That, like, again, it's just your attitude, excuse me, and how you would choose to live your life. And if you're allowing those decisions, let me try that again. If you're allowing for those decisions to be influenced by somebody outside of you, well, then it's not you making that choice. You're just either agreeing or disagreeing with somebody, but you're not asking yourself the important questions about the quality of your existence, right? Because I would go so far as to say that if somebody did that, the focus of their thinking was, here, what is the quality of my existence? What constitutes a quality existence? You might discover them not living the way that most people currently do, spending 6 hours scrolling through TikTok. Like, are you fucking for real?
Yeah, like I could investigate an issue that happened in like 2007 or 14 or whatever year if
Well,
I'm interested. But you're just gonna be angry about it.
or you could just go outside and enjoy the day. Isn't that
Right.
why we're outside, right?
Right.
Like,
Whereas if you go for the walk, you treat people nicely, you're benefiting them too.
right. And so, again, it speaks to the value of human interaction,
Yep.
which you don't get as much as you think you're connecting with people electronically. That's not a connection, right? A connection is there's so many more subtle cues that occur during the course of a face-to-face conversation, body language, facial expressions. It conveys tons of information which you don't get
Yeah.
if you're texting each other, messaging one another, and then people get, I don't want to talk to people. Well, no wonder you don't want to talk to people, because then you'd have to pay attention to what they're fucking saying, right? Like,
The incentive isn't there when you don't have tone, you don't see their face. It's like
yeah, like
it really isn't the normal interaction.
or how, I wouldn't call it normal. How about just healthy?
Oh yeah, no, it's weird because I don't think our brains interpret it the way we think we interpret it. I think we see it as a dialogue, like if you're reading a book.
Yeah, I think I think that I think that's kind of part of the problem, is that then everything gets reduced to an interpretation. And so if you know, a misplaced word can suddenly mean that they're perceiving some kind of offense, right?
Right.
Like, you go like, come on, man.
Which happens to us.
Happens all the time, right? And so now people are very comfortable at expressing their dissatisfaction from the security of their mom's basement or the bedroom, and hiding behind an electronic screen.
Right.
I go like, I go, you think that might be dulling the nature of your experience with other people? You think it might be having a negative effect?
Yeah, and it's pretty easy too. Like, I misinterpreted what my friend said. I was like, "What the hell is that about?" They correct me. I'm like, "Oh, okay." Fairly simple, but you skip that whole process when you're in person.
Yeah.
And
So imagine then. So you have we're quickly developing a population of indifferent people.
right.
So people who are that indifferent, do you think that we're going to go on continue with the zombie topic, and we were talking about a post-apocalyptic kind of scenario. So this entire dystopian kind of future where, you know, everything's hardship and electronic overlords. Well, fuck, you're kind of living it now. It's not melodramatic. Everything's gray and everything's a desert and stuff like, which is typically what you see in those genres and those subgenres, you know, within fiction.
Yeah, those are also typically late stage or like right when stuff's happening.
Well, but then all that indifference that we're developing in our interactions, couldn't it lead to that very thing?
Right.
And then, so imagine if you had a partial breakdown of society. No basic skills, survival skills. And what'll happen? Well, the worst you can imagine. We'll turn on each other. Right?
Which is terrible because we already introduced a new predator. If we're thinking like Planet of the Apes or Rise of the Planet of the Apes, we've already made a predator. We put it in our environment. We're now incapable to deal with it. And now we have to find a way to use like old systems of living in order to make it through.
And think about the psychological backlash for everybody who's hooked to their electronic device. A week, I don't want to wish this on anyone, but I would love it if the internet crashed for a month.
Oh, there's a lot of people who are antsy.
You'd have people losing their goddamn minds.
Remember there was an outage and it was
only for hours.
Right. What was it? I want to say it was Rogers.
Yeah, like I think it was like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah,
it was just local. I don't know if it was, you know, how widespread it was, but it affected locally. People were getting squirrely, and it was only like 8 hours, 10 hours, or something.
Yeah, I definitely heard a few things, and I'm thinking like, just why don't you have cash? You know, I'm thinking all the normal stuff. He's going, well, my card doesn't work. Maybe I can try on my phone. I'm like, that's not gonna work either.
Yeah. So again, so. Can you imagine then, you know, now we become so dependent on all these electronics, and then that becomes the thing that suddenly, like in an instant, disappears. So what could produce that would be a coronal mass ejection that happens to have, oh damn it, what is it? An EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. It would produce that, and it blankets, say, a region of the planet or the entire planet. That means then all electronics that were exposed that were running while that EMP went off, that pulse would negate the function of those electronics. They'd be rendered useless. You couldn't post the event, recharge them. They're done. So it could, again, one of the many reasons that we could have this dystopian future or post-apocalypse, right? That would be the apocalypse, the tanking of all this shit.
Yeah, how many things have chips in it nowadays?
Everything does, right? So again, it's one of those things that I kind, in terms of like genre and subgenres, I really do like it. I like the post-apocalyptic, Ragnarok, Last Judgment, Second Coming, the scenarios where it's a complete destabilization of society, and then they're presented that there are elements within society that manage to maintain some kind of coherence and integrity. Planet of the Apes is a great example, like especially the more recent movies where they showed how there were some military elements that maintained control, like at least internally, but they end up succumbing to violence that they perpetrated against the apes. Right, so think of the Terminator movie franchise, the cybernetic revolt, or a technological singularity. The Matrix, AI arrives, and alien invasions and stuff, and the history of science fiction does not paint a good picture for us as human beings.
Yeah, I'm really hoping science fiction's wrong about a lot of stuff.
Remember, it's a place to explore our anxieties. So, in terms of investing, value in them, like that they're an accurate reflection of the future. They're not. They're just an expression of just how frightening the idea is to us.
There's similarities in fantasy. It's just goblins and goblets.
But it doesn't matter. Yeah, the invasion of orcs, which talk about a mind-blowing post-apocalyptic event. You have like some kind of magical gate opening, an army of orcs on giant farting wolves, like to just destabilize society.
It's funny how many different ways we view these ways. Sorry, that sounded wordy. We seem to be very interested in societal collapse. Maybe it's because we're prone to look at issues that are in the future.
That could be because it like absolutely ties into the way our biology and our psychology functions. We're either ruminating about the past or projecting on the future, and that's why we have anxiety. That's why we always speak to the effect that if you're present, then you won't do those things. You won't project on the future, and you won't reflect on the past. Therefore, you'll kind of eliminate the pain and anxiety and the suffering that comes with those reflections or expectations, right? So, but you have to train to that end, and most of us discard it or dismiss it out of hand. That is kind of like silly and that sort of thing. And so you want a revolution that could overturn the planet. You have a partial destabilization, but we still have some degree of coherence that then amongst the general population, to fill their downtime, they begin meditating, and the next thing you know, now you have not just one, but every generation coming up learning to do it, and then what are they doing? They're training their nervous system to be present, and then as a result of that, you get a kinder, more stable kind of humanity as a result. That's the outcome, right? So you can make whatever argument you want, but ultimately, if it became widespread in its use, then you could project that's the kind of impact it would have on the society. So the recovering society that would reemerge from the partial collapse of, say, contemporary society could be a far more stable, far better version of itself, because the individuals are far better and a far better version of themselves, right? So So, like you said, it's one of those things. Like we're speculating, and isn't that what the exercise of imagination and movies are? It's a wild speculation, that playing with these ideas.
Well, I think that's a very accurate thing to speculate on because I'm thinking my first thought initially is like, oh, there's wide degree of skill sets. You're gonna need farmers, this, that. But the meta skill you're gonna need is like you're gonna have to be cohesive with your brothers. So
Okay. So it's interesting that you bring that up. Go ahead, and finish your thoughts. Sorry.
so like patience, attention, um, integrity, all these things that are like meta skills.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, they would help in any society technically.
Right. Well, they're present in today's society too. It's not like we're devoid of that stuff. If we were completely devoid of it, we'd be shooting each other on the streets and taking their wallets and their phones and stuff like that. So it's present. It just it's not it's not a potent guide for the behavior of the average individual, right? And what you're talking about is that's cultivating kind of like a philosophical perspective on here, how do we function now in light of this, that now we're facing a dystopian future or this post-apocalyptic event. So it's really interesting because now you created this great segue for this idea that what if portions of the society break down? How do people survive? Particularly if now the ability to be able to resupply and have access to material resources dries up or disappears or becomes a minimum. So I've taken many first aid courses, and one of the first things that they talk to you about is how important it is to have a minimum of a liter of water available in any given household per person for a minimum of 3 days, right? That would be in the event, like, and they're only and in the context of that course, they're only talking about like hurricanes and storm events and stuff where you might be without power for like 3 or 4 days.
Which wouldn't even be the most extreme one we've
Right.
had recently.
Right. So then it's important then that you have at least access to clean drinkable water.
I'm not saying we in Canada, but
Well, anywhere
the
in the world,
supplies,
right? So then that means having in storage and accessible. So if you have a household with 3 people and you need a liter a day per person for 3 days, that's 9 liters, a minimum of water, right? Stacking your shelves with dried goods and canned goods.
oh,
These are small things that you can do to sort of that in the event that, like I say, the complete loss of power due to like horrific lightning storms or whatever, right?
yeah, and it seems kind of weird that there's a few people that are very against prepping. Like somehow by prepping, you're stating that
It's
you're
not.
hoping for it.
Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't even call what they recommend in on those courses as like prepping. Like it's first aid. It's like here. It's a common sense response to events that do occur.
Yeah, 3 day survival.
Yeah, and so um so it's just exercising a little bit of good judgment. Going here that in anticipation that something like that could happen. We're going to do a complete episode on doomsday preppers because I've been fascinated by the subject, but I'm not going to go there today. But what I am going to do is the first aid courses offer like a practical way of approaching any kind of like event where you might not have access to power for 3 or 4 days. So it's a horrific blizzard and everybody's snowed in. There's nothing's getting around. Nobody's able to leave. Then if you have the availability of food and clean water, you're good. It doesn't matter, right? Because it'll resolve itself. Now, say in the I'm going to offer this up in the example of like a partial or complete collapse of society. And when I say partial, like say its function gets reduced to say 60% of what it was, right? So puts people in a precarious position. And if it's the result of an EM pulse or electromagnetic pulse from a coronal mass ejection from the sun, then, and this is not to terrorize you. What I'm attempting to do now is to empower you. So, in the event of something like that, being sensible and being present are two of the most advantageous things that you can do, right? And not letting your mind get the best of you, right? Because your imagination will amplify the negative effects. So then you have to focus on what can be done, right? In the event of anything like that. So that means your required knowledge to get to a more basic subsistence level of existing. What am I talking about? Hunter and gatherer societies. You have access to all the blades and knives. Every home virtually has a drawer full of that stuff. So what you could learn to do is you could learn to forage for edible plants, insects, as squeamish as some of you may be with the idea that we're talking about a situation where it's live or die, and you don't have access anymore, and you don't know when things are going to return return to in such a way where you're going to be able to have readily available access to the basic needs. So you're going to have to cultivate those basic needs. Now, that's a body of knowledge that the average person doesn't have, but you can acquire. And it doesn't require you to internalize it so that it's a living memory. You have the memory of all this stuff that you need to know to be able to hunt and to gather off the land, right? You can invest your money in survival handbooks. Now, before you lose your shit, when I was in the military, they used to say to us, if you ever got lost or if we get inclement weather and we're out in the bush and we can't be retrieved, that it's advantageous to have something to focus your attention on. So they would recommend like novels and stuff like that. So everybody would have something like that in a plastic bag that they'd have tucked away in their rucksack. So in the event of something like that, then they could focus their mind on reading. So what I chose to do was I got the SAS Survival Handbook, right? So now the SAS Survival Handbook is the title of it is the SAS Survival Handbook: How to Survive in the Wild in Any Climate on Land or at Sea. And SAS stands for Special Air and Service, right? So they're a form. They're part of the British military, but that's notwithstanding, there's tons of available books on bushcraft and survival guides. So, and all of them break down or provide all the information that you would require to be able to make the distinction between insects and plants that you could eat versus those that would be poisonous. So it would give you a fighting chance, is what I'm saying, in the face of that. So my personal view, much like the first aid courses view, is every household should have at least one survival handbook. Because now it's the knowledge, the ability to be able to survive. And then instead of turning on each other in the event of circumstances like that, you could share the knowledge. So it's more hands doing the work to feed each other. So working in mutual support of one another would be far more advantageous than preying on one another.
Right, not to dip into the survivalist thing, or not the survivalist, the prepper thing.
I like preppers, but like I said, it does relate to what we're talking about, but it's worthy of its own conversation.
Right. I was just gonna say it's convenient that there's people that have this mindset. Oh, should things go wrong, I need to have things in place so I'm not prying on other people. Whereas other people have a plan to go out and rob and blah blah blah.
Well, but if everybody cultivated a level of an awareness where they were like, I'm not paranoid, but there's it's not unreasonable to think that something could occur that would create a problem. So
Right. It's just strange that some people believe it's more advantageous
to take
to
advantage of other,
right.
well, if you're trained to be a competitor and a consumer, to me it's not surprising at all. I'm like, so, you know, what will get you through difficult times like that is the ability to be present in the moment, right? To focus on the task at hand, which is survival, and then have a body of knowledge you can draw from to how to survive. So the how to survive, survival handbooks. I should have brought my SAS survival one, but if you go to any bookstore, you're likely to find not just one, but many different publications with regards to surviving and like direct knowledge. Like, here, this is how you build a shelter, like to resist the cold. This is how to start a fire without anything kind of obvious like matches or lighters. It was funny when I was in the military. Everybody, including the non-smokers, always had a small bag of lighters because it was the most convenient, easy way to start a fire. And when I say a bag, they keep them in a Ziploc bag so that in the event that they got wet or anything, the lighters were dry. They could produce fire, right?
Yeah. In a 3-day, situation where you're out there, it's really helpful to even have a lighter. Like the
Yeah,
smallest of
100%.
things.
Or a knife, because when I was in the military, they would often tell us, sometimes the difference between surviving and dying might be the ability to start a fire or to cut something. So it was always advantageous to have a knife, to have a method to generate fire. But like I said, most of these handbooks, you can they break down how to be able to start a fire without anything obvious like matches or a lighter, that just with what you would find out in the natural world. So as difficult as it may be, you could do it. So the requirement is to have that knowledge. But since you can't be expected to go and learn all that knowledge and carry it around for you on the off chance that one day you might have to use it, it might be more advantageous to have a complete breakdown of that knowledge where it's easy to access, and for any of the different problems you may encounter if you're trying to be a hunter or gatherer to survive. It would explain it in explicit detail how to do it. Then, as long as you can read, you got a fighting chance, right? So I'm going. To me, every household should have a survival handbook. Every individual should own their own.
In this world where there's like a apocalypse, post-apocalypse, zombies are around, knowledge really is going to be power.
Right,
That
100%. Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. So instead of somebody trying to take what you got, you can invite them to join you. Here, we can share in this knowledge, and now it's two pairs of hands trying to do the hunting and gathering. We'll increase our success rate significantly by cooperating.
Right. I've heard people go, "Oh, now you have more mouths to feed." I'm like,
No,
"Are you kidding me?"
it's
Like,
more hands doing the work.
yeah,
So it would be more important than to turn to the person standing to your left and right and treat them like, hey, you're family now. Because we either live together or we die together.
oh, worst case scenario, like that's what you want to do. The human population is going to be an issue, regardless of you're going to live or not. You're going to want to make sure you support the people who deserve to.
Well,
So in the
yeah,
circumstance,
but then this way you can actually you go back to more hunter-gatherer roots, where now the children are the responsibility of the entire tribe.
right?
Every adult in the tribe contributes to the survival of the tribe, right?
Yeah, which is drastically different than what we have now. We're selfish, whereas
Right.
there you have to give your life.
What you have to give of yourself freely, right? But in doing that, then you can experience a level of comfort. And so, say, for the sake of argument, that in a dystopian future or post-apocalyptic world, for whatever reasons, zombies, terminators, aliens, virus, whatever, right? That you working together will allow for you to survive long enough for the return of maybe more. I don't want to call it civilized, but like again, the machinery of an advanced civilization that because say there's an EM pulse, all that stuff's rendered useless. Well, then it's going to take time for manufacturers to start manufacturing replacement parts. And currently, like if the power grid, there's elements of the power grid we don't manufacture, at least in North America. We buy them from the cheapest manufacturer, which typically I think is China, and it would take them days, weeks, months to meet. So say you had like a 60% breakdown of society or 40%. It doesn't have to be that significant. What are you going to do when there's not enough to hand out? And there's only in storage in like all the retail places that sell food, they only keep like two days worth of food and to restock the shelves and stuff. So what do you think the first thing people are going to do? They're going to panic and they're going to empty those places out. Well, how do you survive in lieu of that? Right? Well, like I told you, then it requires you to have a knowledge to be able to forage and plants and animals from the environment, and then you're able to survive. Right? They did it 100 years ago.
Yeah,
People did it 100 years ago. You can do it now.
I think city centers are gonna have the biggest issue.
Oh, they'll empty out. People will fucking flee into the rural areas because that's where you're going to be able to hunt and gather with some success, right? Because that's where the animals live. That's where plants grow wildly, right?
Right, these places that don't necessarily rely on the things brought in.
Well,
like there are
it's not that they don't.
fun.
It's just that those are places that'll be abundant in natural and plant life and animals that you're might need to require to survive.
Right, the critical voice in my head just went like, well, there's places you are screwed. Regardless,
Oh, you're fucked.
screwed.
Oh, imagine trying to survive a winter. No, you got no electricity.
Yeah, North Alberta, not even like
How do you? How do you,
north.
Okay, how do you do it? Well, 100 years ago, when they didn't have central heating, people managed to do it. But you have to have a different. It requires a different mindset. So it's not that you can't do it. For the contemporary man and woman, incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. Even if you had the knowledge, and you don't. So what's the next best thing? Well, having access to the knowledge, which is what these survival guides and bush guides are available for. That's why they're valuable. So then, it's the minimum investment on the average person's finances, and it can give you, if nothing else, remember what they used to tell us in the military. You need something for your mind to focus on. It'll give you a sense of relief. Here, whether it's justified or not, but the fact that you have access to this knowledge, so that you can say to yourself, well, in the worst case, I could survive.
I feel like it could be argued for some people like me. It's like, hey, you could save $1 doing this.
Like I just mean like the cost of purchasing one of the books, like a survival hand guide. And
right, no. The investment in the survival book does save you money too, because people look out for firewood. No, you just get sticks and twigs. You don't need a full log.
Right. So, like I said, I think I don't see. It's funny. Remember, all this zombie genre, all this dystopian entertainment, all this stuff. All of this stuff is just an expression of our anxieties that we might have with regards to living, or being so dependent on our society to live, right? So, and the assumption is people assume that somehow it's got the capacity to survive. And I would agree if it was completely decentralized.
Right.
But the fact that it's so centralized, that hyper specialization is its weakness.
Right, like the Silicon Valley is not going to be remade somewhere else necessarily. Like we have a good tech sector here, but
But it's even them. How long do you think it would take for them to recover from some kind of significant
They,
event? Because all the people working there, they still need to eat
yeah,
and be fed.
yeah.
Well, how are you going to do that if
They,
there's no grocery store?
Bob, they can't even recover from current housing. Like the prices there are insane. I could show you stories.
Well, I'm sure. Look, all I'm saying is that the fact of the matter is that if you're looking for a fighting chance, that knowledge provides that. And if you don't have knowledge, others have provided the knowledge to do that. So the how do you survive? They've provided that. And then it's up to you. For you, like, how much of a survival instinct do you have? How much fire do you have in your spirit to drive you to survive? Survival instinct, right? So ultimately, in light of, like, again, some kind of event that would render society to be minimal, as individuals, you still need to survive. And how are you going to do that? Right? So this is what I'm offering up. This is the idea, that this is the how. This is how you make it happen, right? Or can make it happen.
Probably better to get the book sooner than later. That
I
way,
would recommend going out and getting one right now.
well, you think about it. If something happens, you don't want to be the one person trying to break into a bookstore and getting called like a nerd.
Like I said, you could use that knowledge as a foundation to somebody has a gun. Say, I give a quick scenario, post-apocalyptic scenario. Someone has a gun and they see you gathering stuff, and you've got baskets, and it's all the remnants from from the society that failed, and you got a bucket and you're filling it full of stuff, and you're wandering through the bush and you're plucking shit, and they give me everything you got. Well, that's it. That's all there is. But if you don't threaten me, we can use that gun to get meat. We can hunt game, and I can share the knowledge. And right here it shows you how. So instead of threatening me to take this shit, you can just take it and leave, or you can help me out, and we can help each other out, and we can gather more, and I can show you what stuff, and we'll just read it from the book.
Yeah, thank God people know the expression "teach a man to fish," because in that moment it's gonna click.
Right. So they'll clue in and go, you know what? We'd be better served if I wasn't a dick.
Even if they shot you and took the book, it's more helpful to have you around because you're showing, hey, even at this extent, I'm willing to go and help.
Yeah, especially if you've got, now you've managed. So it's happened. The event's happened, and now you've accumulated experience because every day you're out there hunting and gathering, and you were a guy who pushed pencils before the whole thing collapsed. But you have strong work ethic. You're not squeamish, and you're driven. Suddenly you have the ability to survive, and not just feed yourself. If you can spend an entire day doing that, you can you can collect enough food to keep a couple of people alive.
It would be interesting to see how a small group would deal with like skill sets and specialization because I don't believe we specialize the way we do naturally. Like here, it's hyper specialized, whereas
I think in a hunter-gatherer society, or if you're conducting yourself that way,
yeah,
you're broad. Everyone's a broad generalist, right? So you'd be doing things like fishing and foraging. That's how you survive, right?
I think at the extremes you might have some guy that works with like convenient metal, like just whatever lying around.
But see, something like that could end up being advantageous. So you could see that in the aftermath, individuals who have skills like working with metal and stuff like that they would be important. So you go here. I don't need you to hunt and gather. What I need you to do is to keep working metal because we need you to make something here, and we're going to take this raw shit and you're going to melt it down and use it, and we're going to use it somehow to make better tools for foraging. Excuse me. That sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I would imagine that 15 to 30 people is probably enough just to stay alive for a generation.
Well, like I said, if you could network with with all your neighbors, and then you work as a collective, you increase your chances of survival significantly. A dramatic increase. But if you turn on each other, you might be lucky if there's only one of you to survive, right? Can I get a time check?
I don't have my watch on me. Screen went blank. Can you punch in real quick?
Sure.
It says 1:55. 2-hour video.
Okay, it's good enough. All right. Apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay, so having said all of that, I think that that's a perfectly good place to bring this conversation to a close. Again, you know, considering that we were talking about the zombie apocalypse, we're actually talking about the apocalypse or post-apocalyptic life. So you can view it however you want. If you think you're safe, go on continuing to think you're safe. Nothing's going to happen. There's nothing to see here. You can just get on with your 9 to 5, and you'll be fine, right? But for the rest of us who consider these things, and from time to time we entertain the thought, how would you choose? Not that you're given a choice, but how would you choose to function under those circumstances, right? So it's something that might be worth considering, right? Your chances increase significantly if we treat each other with respect and regard. And that's true now with all the abundance that we have versus being in a circumstance where there's no abundance. That doesn't change. It's true regardless. So I think I think that really does sum it up. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I definitely believe we are what brings that extra bit, that extra bit of security. There is abundance. It just comes from us.
I agree. Like
material.
honestly, the individual. Most of us are so disempowered. We never think that we can make a difference. And let me be the voice to tell you that one person can make all the difference, and every one of us can be that one person. So maybe that's the way you should start thinking about yourself, right? That you're the one person who can make all the difference. I can't imagine anything more empowering, right? So we're going to close on that. So in closing, I would like to say, question everything, including yourself, especially yourself. Seek balance, seek knowledge, seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical objective thinker. Thank you for your time. Have a great night.